The Dust Bowl forever changed the landscape in Oklahoma. Out of that disaster came lessons that have helped Oklahomans become better stewards of the land by protecting soil from erosion. One of the ways that's done is through flood control. Our state now has more than 2,100 upstream flood control structures that help prevent the devastation suffered during the Dirty 30s.
The worst single storm of the Dust Bowl happened on April 14, 1935. Acres of Oklahoma soil were swept as far away as Washington, D.C. Apocalyptic scenes were created by a severe drought coupled with extensive farming without crop rotation or other techniques to prevent wind erosion. During the 1930s, the dust storms destroyed vegetative cover and clogged stream channels with sediment. That led to severe flooding.
In the middle of the Dust Bowl, in April of 1934, we had this huge flood event in western Oklahoma. The town of Hammond received about 14 to 15 inches of rain, and there was a big flood that killed 17 people. In the middle of the Depression, created $1 million worth of damage.
Mike Thralls is the executive director of the Oklahoma Conservation Commission. A copy of the Clinton Daily News published 78 years ago, and its account of the flood is for Thralls a serious reminder of the importance of soil and water conservation.
There's also the talk about one family that was riding on their house. They hadn't gotten out quickly enough. Their house was dislodged and moving down the river, and then when it struck a bridge, it was demolished, and all 5 members of that family lost their lives.
Devastating floods in all the Dust Bowl states prompted Congress to pass the Flood Control Act of 1944, which established upstream flood prevention projects on 11 watersheds, including Oklahoma.
The very first one of these dams in the nation was built in Oklahoma, in southwest Oklahoma, down Cloud Creek Site 1 near Cordell. And that started a huge construction effort that lasted for several decades.
Larry Caldwell is the watershed specialist for the Oklahoma Conservation Commission. He says Oklahoma has long been a leader in the watershed program.
Starting in the mid-50s, there was an average of 2 dams built each and every week for 15 years. In 1 year, in 1965, there was 165 dams built in that 1 year.
Cities like Stillwater are now protected by systems of flood control structures.
Back in the late 1950s, there was a rain event, had close to, actually in some cases, a little over 20 inches of rain that hit the city of Stillwater, caused massive flooding, and that led to the construction of these systems to provide that protection for this town.
The dam, which created Lake McMurtry in Stillwater, came along a little later in the early 70s. It protects farmland and structures downstream.
This is really a good example of the structures that were built throughout the state, starting back in the late 1930s and early 40s and working up to this day, quite frankly.
Clay Pope is the executive director of the Oklahoma Association of Conservation Districts. He and his colleagues oversee 2,100 upstream flood control structures in Oklahoma that were constructed by local conservation districts with assistance from the USDA.
Not many people realize that these dams are up there upstream protecting them and may not even know that they exist, let alone how they impact their daily lives. That the flooding that used to occur back in the 30s and 40s no longer occurs in many of these communities because of these dams.
They're a significant investment that saves lives and property in the state of Oklahoma and also helps protect our natural resources, because if you look at the conservation angle, by making sure that you're controlling flash flooding, you not only protect lives and property, you also don't see the water erosion that you would have in some of those flash flood events on farm ground below where these dams are put in place.
41 of the dams provide water supplies to surrounding communities.
This is a $2 billion infrastructure, $2 billion with a B. And it's providing some $83 million worth of benefits, flood protection benefits, to our citizens every year.
Caldwell says Oklahoma's success in land and water conservation is something to be proud of.
But now, as Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story. Most of these dams were designed with a 50-year design life. So if you add 50 years onto the mid-50s, from this point forward for the next 50 years, we're going to have 2 dams per week come to the end of their design life.
Caldwell says by the end of this year, 600 dams will have reached their 50-year design life. In 3 years, more than half of the 2,100 dams in Oklahoma are going to reach that point.
That's several $1 million that have to be provided to try to fix those dams. It's over $2 million a dam is the cost on rehabilitating these structures. Now, there is some matching money from the federal government, but you can tell by just that number alone, it's an astronomical amount of funding that we're trying to come up with to make sure that we can maintain this protection for future generations.
In 2009, the state legislature approved a $25 million revenue bond to repair damages in the state's conservation flood infrastructure. That funding came after severe flooding across the state in 2007.
That money only goes so far. In fact, we're going through the last of that money now, and we still have these dams that are reaching their design life that we're going to have to deal with. So it's a huge challenge. Money's tight. There's a lot of needs for it out there, but we're hopeful that we can keep the interest at the state capitol to make sure that we have those resources to protect this infrastructure and provide that protection for lives and property.
According to the Conservation Commission, there are about 175 high-hazard dams across the state that were not designed to current safety criteria. Those are dams located in critical areas that protect people who live or work downstream.
Now, that is not to say that they're anything about the condition of the dams. They're safe dams, but they do not meet all the safety criteria that's required on a lot of those dams. In order to bring those up to current safety criteria, it's around $450 million.
There is a program that provides a 2-to-1 federal funding match to assist Oklahoma and other states with the rehabilitation of aging dams. However, Congress must still appropriate the money to carry out the program. In 2012, Congress appropriated only $15 million for dam rehabilitation nationwide. Even if Congress does approve additional funding, the state legislature would have to appropriate money to pay for its portion.